The convergence of our voices is the song of our beauty. Many voices will speak here, the song woven through diverse notes.
Okay, so this is from the opening of chapter 4 from Paradise Swans. Matron Greenstone was relaxing on the crab claw's gentle hands and welcomed the peace and quiet at last. But she couldn't stop the tears that welled up every time she looked around the partly empty and often silent dwelling. At this hour, it should have been abuzz with activity as the nobles and their families prepared to start their day. But nowadays, except for Run Swiftly and his retinue, much of the building was empty, and the rest occupied by older single people like herself, who remained saddened and silenced, with even their servants creeping around like ghosts. A lethargy had encompassed the entire village, now that their head had been so cruelly cut off. A fate that seemed to be overtaking all of the Taino, Matron Greenstone thought, except for those traitors who were prepared to bow, worse, to join the Paranagiri in the slaughter of their own. What was happening to the world these days?
Thank you for that lovely reading and welcome to Olive Senior to Crone Chronicles. And she was reading from the book Paradise Once, which is her new release, and it's set, is it Cuba? What is now Cuba?
It's set in Cuba, but it
Yeah,
could have been in any of the countries of what is called the Greater Caribbean
yes,
that were inhabited by the Taino.
yes. So the Taino were once thought, or when I was growing up, it was told to me that they just didn't exist anymore, but that's not true, is it?
No, and that was told to me too in childhood. This is what our history book said, that
Yes.
Columbus came, met these primitive little people, and shortly thereafter they sort of vanished. And even as a child, I was really struck by this.
hmm
And I think I've been thinking about this ever since. And I've spent many years of my life researching what happened to these people. They weren't called Taino then. They were called Arawaks,
Yes.
certainly in the English speaking world. And so my novel is sort of the end of a very lengthy process to rediscover the Taino, and of course to discover, like many people today, that far from vanishing, they exist in the bloodstream of a significant proportion of Caribbean people from the Northern Caribbean, especially in the Spanish-speaking islands. I think DNA showing over 60% of people have Taino blood because it's transmitted, or that's transmitted through the mother's side, right?
hmm
And a lot of people have been reclaiming their Taino identity because even though it's hard to trace a direct connection, with the Taino, but they live on in our culture, in our blood, and a lot of people are now recognizing that we need to rethink our history, which did
We
not
do.
begin in 1492.
Yes, we do. Yeah, and it's so great that books like yours are now coming out, which show us that history. Yeah,
Yeah.
and you've done many years of research. And what sort of research did you do?
Well, I've read just about everything that's been written about the Taino. A lot of the impulse came from the quincentennial of Columbus's arrival in, what was it, 1992. That a lot of Caribbean scholars got interested, but before that, there were books written or interests from mainly American archaeologists, because of course archaeology is the main method by which we know anything about the Taino. They left very little of themselves, but there's also we know something about their mythology. And there's now an enormous amount of scholarship on the Taino. I mean, almost daily there's a new article out, their books and so on, because there's just so much interest in knowing more about these people. And we're finding out more and more. What amazes me is how much you can learn from archaeology, from bones and residue and so on. But you have to match that. And scholars have done so with their mythology and with the amazingly beautiful art and artifacts that they left behind. So it's a composite. My research is based on what's out there, which is a composite of all these methods to try and find out more. And of course, we now have a stronger idea of where they came from originally. And we can look at people there, the Arawak speakers of Central America, and learn more as well.
Mhm. Oh, Paradise Once is just one of your many books. Um, and what are your other recent books?
Well, I have another book that's just come out. It's not yet in the bookshops, but it's a book that I did as Poet Laureate of Jamaica. And, each of us was asked to produce something lasting. So I produced a book called Tree Scene. I don't know if you can see it, but it's a
Ah.
beautiful little coffee table book. It's a compilation of poems by 30 Jamaican poets that I selected, and I also selected 30 photographs of trees by a wonderful photographer called Donette Zaka. And we put that together, and it's just I'm really thrilled with it. It's so that's my latest, I suppose, book. But this is a more limited. This is limited to um, Jamaica, and also as poet laureate, I wanted to promote environmental issues. And this is really to encourage people to not to go chopping down trees, but to recognize their importance to us, as my preface starts out, to every breath we take.
Mhm. We are dependent on the trees for our breath, aren't
Absolutely.
we? Yeah. And so you have written nonfiction, you've written short stories, you've written poetry. Is there one of these genres that you feel is your favorite?
My favorite.
Mm,
Uh, no, no, because, I just do what comes to me in the moment and develop that in my mind. And things, something might come as a poem or it might come as fiction. The books that are nonfiction are different because those are based on interests that I have had. For instance, I have a book on the building of the Panama Canal,
mhm,
where the West Indians, who played a major part, are written out of the history. But I had family, I grew up with family who had been to Panama, as did tens of thousands of people during the construction of the canal. And I had no idea what they did there. So that book came out of my interest in knowing something. And I
mhm,
think all my work comes out of that, comes out of my curiosity about something. And it ends up either as, a short story or a poem or a children's book or what have you. But it starts off with something that engages my attention.
mhm.
And it's like a little seed planted, and that
Yes.
grows into something.
Yeah. And I think that book was Dying to Better Themselves.
Yes.
And that is one of the books on the Bocas Literary Festival list of the 100 books that made us, isn't it, in the
Yes,
Caribbean?
I think it
Yes.
is.
And several of your other books are in that list too. So,
Yeah, there are four of my books on that list. So I'm very pleased with that, actually.
yeah, yeah. So you're in good company there with
Oh, yeah.
Eric Walcott and CLR James and I
Yeah.
think Dion Brand is in that list too. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of that list was driven by books that are taught in school or that have been read by people of, certain generations coming up.
Hmm.
So at the launch of that, I said, what will be interesting is to see what are the books on the next list. And, because it's a reflection of what people have been reading,
Yes.
what they're reading in school or and I think it will be interesting to see how people's interests have shifted or not. So I
Hmm.
think it's useful to have a baseline like that.
Yes, it is. Yeah. And yeah, there'll be new people coming up, but some of those books are maybe 50 years old or more,
Oh
and
yeah.
they're still really great books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're producing a lot of brilliant new writers. I can't keep up really with,
Yeah.
with the writing that's coming out of not just the Caribbean itself, but the diaspora,
Yes.
Canada, America,
Hmm.
England, and so on.
Yeah. So you were in Trinidad for the Bocas Literature Festival for
Yeah,
the
I was there
yeah.
this year, this
Yeah.
past festival. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that must have been great fun.
It's great. And we also have the Calabash Festival here in Jamaica.
Ah,
There are also a number of smaller festivals taking place all the time now. So it's
yeah.
it's it's quite an exciting time, I think, for
Yes.
books and readers and reading and so on. It's having a moment, or I
Hmm.
hope at a moment. Yeah.
So you're in Jamaica now.
I'm in Jamaica at the moment, in
And
Toronto.
you spend a lot of time in Toronto?
I come and go, yeah.
Yeah.
At the moment, I'm spending quite a bit of time in Jamaica, but there
Yeah.
are times when and I will be in Toronto shortly. So I
Uh-huh.
sort of go back and forth, which
Yeah.
is nice.
So when did you first go to Toronto?
Oh gosh, it's so long ago, I can't even remember. Um, I left Jamaica not intending to leave. I went to Europe and stayed there for a while, and then I went to Canada. Um, so it's well over 30 years, I think.
Mm, hmm.
I've always I'm privileged to be able to go back and forth,
Yes.
because that means that my connection with Jamaica and the Caribbean has remained fresh.
Hmm.
That's important to me because that's the heart of my writing, really. It's what I know,
Yes.
Caribbean culture and history and so
Yes.
on. So, yeah.
Mhm. And what would you say that you gained from growing up in the Caribbean that perhaps you may not have gained while you were living in Canada or somewhere else?
Yeah. Well, it's hard to say in terms of growing up.
Yeah.
But I think what was important for me as a writer is growing up not just in Jamaica, but in deep rural Jamaica,
Mm.
where in my childhood, it was still colonial, very cut off in a way in terms of, getting around and so on. And so I grew up in a society where people were self-sufficient in many ways. So there was a lot of things to learn about traditional culture. And also, it was just a start of an interest in what people then called folk culture. In other words, what mattered was British culture and
Yeah.
European culture. And suddenly we were realizing, hey, we have a culture too, and it's grounded, it's right here. So I grew up not even recognizing the wealth of culture that there was in these rural communities. And
Hmm.
I think that is what has shaped me as a person. Also, and also not just as a person, but opened my mind creatively because I grew up in within the natural world. I was just surrounded by nature, you know.
Hmm.
And so for me, I might have had that sort of upbringing if I'd grown up in Canada, but I don't know. I think it's a very different kind of environment.
Yes. Yes.
But that is what I value about my life, that childhood in this rural Jamaican community. I'm not saying I appreciated it at the time. You know what I mean? It was
Yes.
but I think as a writer, it also I grew up in two different communities, two different worlds, and it gave me an understanding of what is called two Jamaicas, representing the two elements in a spectrum, one of which is represented by Africa and the other by Britain, England, Europe, and so on. And there's a mixture in between. And
Yes.
not a lot of people are privileged to share both of that growing
Mhm.
up, to
Yeah.
have access to both of those,
Mhm.
which I did.
Okay. And how would you describe yourself in general and the things that you've done?
Well, I've never had a life plan.
Yeah.
I say I live intuitively. I just decide what matters to be, and I go after it without any plan, without knowing what I'm doing. And I've always wanted, I knew I was going to be a writer from a very early age, from the time I learned to read, which was I was 4 or thereabouts, or an artist of some sort. I was going to be a creative person, as nowadays we'd use that term. And that is a path I have followed all my life. Of course, I wish somebody had given me good advice when I was young to say, get a profession that will pay you a lot of money. But I have lived the life that I chose, and not many people can say that. I've remained true to my choices, and I take responsibility for them. And I have spent a life where, looking back, I can say I haven't wasted it. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I have worked all my life at the things that matter to me. I've made those choices. And so looking back, I feel comfortable with what I've achieved. I mean, I could have done a lot more and and so on. I'm not being arrogant about it. But I'm just saying that I just followed my path and I didn't know where the path was going. But, my favorite book as a child was Alice in Wonderland. We just took on the challenge as a girl and just went after it. She just followed where the adventure led her. And I think that's how I've lived my life too.
Yeah, and what a great way to live life. And perhaps there aren't a lot of people who could say that, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Looking back, I mean, there were times when I looked at other people, my friends, and how they lived, and I thought, oh, that's how I should be living. But I've never seriously wanted anybody else's life.
Hmm.
And now I'm at the point where I feel, yeah, it's good to be engaged, to live a life where you have been engaged with so many things, not just with domesticity or yourself or a small world. I've taken on the whole world in a way.
Yeah, you have. And you've been recognized by the Royal Society of Literature in the UK.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a recent thing.
yeah, and you had quite a few recognitions, haven't you?
Yeah,
Worldwide, I'd say. Yeah.
yes, I'm grateful for that. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't, I part of the reason I think I've produced so much is that I've never gone into writing to make money or to be famous or anything. I started out, I didn't know any writers. I knew
Mhm.
nothing about writing. My first couple of books, I knew I just did them. And so that's always been my attitude ever since. I don't go seeking, anything.
Yeah.
For me, what matters is the writing itself and doing the best I can in that respect. So it's as we say in Jamaica, it's brata. It's an extra if I'm recognized in some way, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Is there anything you would like to say
Yeah.
to the audience here?
Well, I'd like to go back to my novel, Paradise Swans,
Okay.
to say that it is a novel, it is fiction. I made up the characters and so on, but it's heavily based on research because I felt that I wanted to project an image of the Taino, the indigenous people of the Caribbean, or one of the indigenous people, in a way that is true to that represents them in a truthful kind of way.
Mhm.
And I would like the book to start a conversation about our indigenous forebears, or the way we look at history. You know, we're now told by the archaeologists that the Caribbean has been inhabited for 6,000 years. And
Yeah.
yet we either talk about history in 1492 when Columbus sailed the ocean blue, or in the British Islands, in Jamaica certainly, history begins in 1655 when the British took Jamaica from the Spaniards.
Yes.
plantation economy, the plantation system was established. We tend to view that as our history, but I would like us to step outside those boundaries and to start thinking about history in a much deeper way and our connection with the indigenous peoples of the Americas and about what happened, what really happened when the old world met the new world in 1492. That is really what we need to be talking about. So I
Hmm.
hope my book stimulates that kind of conversation.
Yeah. And you use quite well, some of the language, the words that came from the Taino people, and some of them we kind of still use today, don't we,
Yes.
in
Yeah.
regular language. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
The first word that made it into a European dictionary was the word canoe,
Hmm.
which is a tiny word. And a lot of our words are derived, like hurricane, and so yucca, etc. A lot of them, the tiny words have come down to us through the Spanish, because of course, they were the first Europeans who met them were Spanish speakers. And a lot of the people who are now preserving the heritage and so on are still from the Spanish speaking islands. But that's another thing that we need to recognize that the indigenous people live in us. Even if we're not indigenous ourselves, our cultures are shaped by this. For instance, Maroon culture is
Hmm.
part of indigenous culture because the first Maroons were Taino or indigenous people and runaway Africans who made common cause, who resisted the colonial enterprise. We eat bami in Jamaica almost every morning. It's our favorite breakfast food. Well, that is cassava bread, which
Ah.
was the staff of life of the Taino, and so on. There are just so many ways that we can connect. The fruit we eat, even some of our religious and spiritual practices can be traced back in some ways.
Mm.
So I think we've missed out a lot when we're told in our history books that, oh, these are these are the people vanished, so to.
Yes. Yeah, but
So
they
it's exciting to rediscover them.
it really is, yes, and to bring them to life within ourselves and the broader culture. Well, I think we'll end here. And thank you so much for talking with me today. And I hope everybody else enjoyed this conversation and that you will like the video and subscribe to the Crone Chronicles channel. So thank you, Olive Senior. It was a great pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you, Gail, for inviting me. It was a pleasure for me too. Take
Thanks.
care.